She walked into the prison visiting room with a smile, carrying the papers he thought would finally change his life. Papers that promised freedom, papers that promised love, papers that promised a visa that could take them far from the walls that caged him. But within minutes the smile faded, secrets spilled out, and what began as a story of hope twisted into a nightmare. In front of guards, families, and children, he reached across the table, and what he did next would leave everyone frozen in horror. This is not just another story of crime. This is the story of an inmate and his wife. A love that was built on promises, on papers, and on a visa that was supposed to change everything. But what began as a marriage of convenience soon became a trap of lies, betrayal, and deadly revenge. Before we dive deep into this story, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you never miss the real stories that matter. Stories that keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. And as you're watching, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I read every single one, and I'd love to know where this story is reaching tonight. Before prison walls and betrayal, there was a young man with dreams far bigger than the life he was born into. He came to Canada as a student, chasing opportunity, chasing freedom, chasing a future that his family back home could be proud of. But dreams are expensive. Tuition, rent, survival. Everything cost more than he could ever earn. And soon, desperation pushed him into choices he never imagined. That's when she came into his life. She wasn't the love story he grew up dreaming of. She was an arrangement, a marriage that was never about romance but about papers. With her signature, he could secure a visa, stay in the country, and open doors that would otherwise remain locked. For her, it meant money, stability, maybe even status. For him, it meant survival. But what neither of them realized was that every promise built on paperwork and lies carries a debt. And sooner or later, that debt comes due. The wedding was simple. No big dress, no flowers, no family gathered to celebrate. Just a courthouse, a few signatures, and the quiet exchange of vows that neither of them truly meant. For outsiders, it looked like love. For him, it was his ticket to stay. For her, it was money, and a chance to play a role that gave her control. At first, everything seemed to work. He could now breathe knowing his visa was safe. He could walk the streets of Canada without fear of deportation. He could study, he could work small jobs, and he could tell his family back home that everything was going well. They believed their son had made it. What they didn't know was that he was living in a marriage built on lies. But with every lie comes a shadow. She wanted more than the money he promised. She wanted freedom too. Freedom from him. Freedom to live her own life. Freedom to use the papers she now controlled. Behind his back, she began to make her own deals. She spoke to people he didn't know. She whispered about her marriage in ways that made it clear it was all a scam. And then came the betrayal that would cut deeper than prison walls ever could. He discovered that while he was clinging to her as his lifeline, she was already seeing someone else. A man from her past. An ex. To her, the marriage had never been about building a future together. To her, he was just another step, another tool, another name on a document. To him, it wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. He was the one locked inside a system he couldn't escape, while she walked free with the power to control his fate. And the more he realized how she used him, the more the anger grew. What started as survival was about to turn into revenge. Prison visits were supposed to bring comfort, a chance to talk, to smile, to pretend that walls and bars didn't exist. But for him, every visit with his wife became a reminder of betrayal. She would sit across the table with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that felt rehearsed, hollow, cold. He began to notice little things. The new clothes she wore, the way she carried herself, the faint perfume that lingered long after she left. It wasn't the scent of a faithful wife waiting for her husband. It was the scent of someone living another life, a life that didn't include him. Conversations grew tense. He asked questions, she deflected. He pressed harder, she grew colder. Until one day, during a visit, the truth slipped out in the sharpest way possible. She no longer cared about the act. She no longer cared if he knew. She laughed when he asked about her loyalty. She mocked him for believing this marriage was anything more than a contract. And then she said the words that shattered what little restraint he had left. "You were never my future. You were just my visa." The room went silent. His heart pounded, his hands trembled, and for the first time, rage outweighed reason. He wasn't just a prisoner behind bars. He was a man stripped of dignity, used, and discarded. And in that moment, a thought began to grow inside him. If she could use him like this, if she could walk away without consequence, maybe the only way to end it was to make sure she never walked away again. What no one knew was that this thought, planted like a seed, would soon grow into a plan. A plan that would stain the visiting room forever. In prison, silence is dangerous. Too much time alone gives space for thoughts to grow louder, darker, heavier. Day after day, night after night, his wife's words replayed in his mind. "You were just my visa." The echo of that sentence became a chain around his heart, tighter than the steel bars that surrounded him. He stopped writing letters home. He stopped joining the others in the yard. His friends noticed the change, the way his eyes looked distant, the way he clenched his fists for no reason, the way he carried rage like a shadow that never left his side. Inside, a storm was building, and with every visit from her, it grew stronger. She would sit across from him, casual, cold, sometimes even smiling as she mentioned her new life outside. To her, it was a game. To him, it was torture. One night, he made a decision. If love was never real, if the marriage was nothing but a scam, then her betrayal had written the ending for both of them. He didn't have power outside these walls, but inside the visiting room, he could control one thing: the last chapter of their story. Quietly, carefully, he began to prepare. A sharpened piece of plastic hidden away. A rage rehearsed in silence. A plan born out of humiliation and betrayal. The visiting room would no longer be a place of fake smiles and lies. It would become the stage for his revenge. It was an ordinary afternoon in the prison visiting room. Families gathered around tables, children laughed as they clung to their parents. Guards stood watch with the calm rhythm of routine. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing gave away the storm about to break. She walked in as she always did, confident, almost careless. In her hand were papers, forms he thought might be about their future. A cruel reminder that every page, every signature, every promise was tied to the visa that bound them together. She sat down, smoothed the papers, and smiled as if nothing was wrong. But for him, everything was wrong. The smile that once brought him hope now mocked him. The papers that once symbolized freedom now represented chains. And the woman sitting across from him, the wife who vowed to stand by him, was now nothing more than a stranger who had used his name, his trust, his life. The conversation began quietly. He asked if she had been with someone else. She shrugged. He asked if she ever truly loved him. She laughed. Then, leaning forward, she whispered the words that lit the fire inside him for the last time. "You were never my husband. You were just my visa." The sound around him faded. Guards, children, the chatter of families. It all disappeared into silence. His hand moved quickly, almost instinctively. From beneath the table, he pulled out the sharpened plastic he had hidden away. Before anyone could react, he reached across the table and drove it into her neck. Gasps filled the room. Screams echoed as guards rushed forward. Families froze in terror as children cried. But in his eyes there was no fear, no hesitation. Every strike was fueled by months of betrayal, by the weight of humiliation, by the rage of a man who believed he had nothing left to lose. By the time they pulled him away, her body was motionless. The papers she carried scattered across the floor stained in red, as if mocking the dream they once pretended to share. The marriage that began with a signature had ended with blood. And in that single moment, the visiting room, once a place of brief reunions and fragile hope, became a crime scene that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. The visiting room erupted into chaos. Guards wrestled him to the ground, his hands still trembling from the attack. Families were rushed out, children shielded from the horror of what they had just seen. The air was thick with screams, the metallic scent of blood and the silence of a woman who would never speak again. He was dragged back to his cell, but this time there were no words, no pleas, no fight left in him. He sat against the wall, his eyes empty, as if the storm that consumed him had finally burned itself out. For the prison staff, this wasn't just another violent outburst. It was an eruption of something far deeper. The investigation began immediately. Officers collected the scattered papers, the blood-stained documents that once promised a new life. Detectives pieced together her background, her history, her connections, and slowly, the truth began to surface. This was never a love story. This was a transaction, a marriage built on the promise of a visa, a lifeline for him, and a business deal for her. Witnesses came forward, friends spoke out, and soon the ugly details painted a clear picture. She had been seeing another man. She had laughed about the arrangement behind closed doors. To her, he was just a paycheck, a contract, a name she could sign to secure her own gain. But to him, it was everything. It was his future, his dignity, his chance to stay in a country where he believed his dreams could come true. When he realized it was all a lie, the anger consumed him until there was no way back. Investigators labeled it a tragedy born out of desperation and betrayal. But to those who were there that day, the guards, the families, the children, it was something far worse. It was proof of how love twisted into lies, and how lies twisted into blood. Months later, the story that began in silence behind prison walls played out loudly in a courtroom packed with reporters, lawyers, and grieving families. The inmate sat shackled, his eyes fixed on the ground as prosecutors laid bare the story that shocked everyone. They spoke of a marriage born not from love, but from paperwork. They revealed the hidden payments, the messages that proved she had mocked him to her friends, bragging that he was nothing more than her ticket to stability. They showed the witnesses who confirmed she had been seeing another man while cashing in on the benefits of a sham marriage. But none of it excused what happened in the visiting room. The prosecutors reminded the jury of the children who screamed that day, the guards who could not stop him in time, and the woman who, no matter her actions, did not deserve to die so brutally. The defense painted a different picture. They described a man consumed by desperation, abandoned by the very person he trusted to secure his future. They argued it was not premeditation, but a moment of uncontrollable rage, a breaking point fueled by betrayal. The jury listened, the families wept, and after days of testimony, the verdict was clear: guilty. When the judge spoke, his words echoed through the silent courtroom. The inmate would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of freedom, no chance of appeal. The marriage that began as a deal for a visa ended not only in death, but in a sentence that ensured he would never walk free again. For him, there would be no second chance. For her, no redemption. For everyone who witnessed it, no forgetting. When the doors of the courtroom finally closed, what remained was not just a story of crime. It was a story of choices. A young man who once came to Canada with dreams of success. A wife who saw marriage as a business deal, and a system that turned desperation into deception. The truth is, visa marriages are more common than most realize. For some, they are a lifeline. For others, they are a trap. And when love is replaced by paperwork, when promises are replaced by lies, the results can be devastating. In this case, it ended in blood. A young woman lost her life. A man lost his freedom forever. Two families were left broken on opposite sides of a courtroom, and a community was left asking how something meant to create opportunity could end in such destruction. It is a chilling reminder that every shortcut has a cost. Every lie plants a seed, and sometimes those seeds grow into something we can never take back. If you've been following this story, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And more than that, tell me what you think about this tragedy. Was it desperation? Was it betrayal? Or was it both? Because stories like this don't just live in court files or news reports. They live in the lessons we take away. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones written in pain. This is how the story of an inmate and his wife ended. Not in freedom, not in love, but in betrayal, blood, and a life sentence. A marriage meant for a visa became a prison for them both. One behind bars forever, the other in the silence of a grave. For those who witnessed it, the memory of that day in the visiting room will never fade. For us, it stands as a reminder of how desperation, lies, and broken trust can spiral into unthinkable consequences. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. If you felt the weight of it, make sure you subscribe right now so you never miss the next case we uncover. And before you leave, drop a comment below. Let me know where in the world you're watching from. I read everyone, and it helps me see how far these stories travel. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, behind every headline, there is always a deeper story waiting to be told.